Battlefield 2042. What more can really be said about this game? I'd be willing to bet that most of the people that click on this video already know the story of what happened with Battlefield 2042, and you likely have your own opinions about the game. There have been a slew of different Battlefield 2042 reviews posted to YouTube, but I decided now would be the right time for my review, which I've been teasing for quite a long time, because Battlefield 2042 is now viewable in its totality. All of its content, and really all of its updates that matter, have released, so we can look at the official finished version of Battlefield 2042. But before I get into anything, I just want to give the developers credit up front. They have done a decent job at pulling Battlefield 2042 back from the absolute chasm that it released in. Don't worry, we'll get into that in great detail. But that is really the only credit I'm going to give in this entire video. I believe the most effective version of a Battlefield 2042 review is one that truly points out every single little tiny mistake the game made and why it's a mistake, and then provides something that they should have done in place of that mistake. So without further ado, let's get into the definitive Battlefield 2042 review. And if you would be so kind, this video took quite a long time to make, so please drop a like and subscribe to the channel for future Battlefield content and daily streams. Before we can talk about Battlefield 2042, it is essential to establish Battlefield's situation leading up to Battlefield 2042 being revealed. Battlefield 2042 was, of course, the game to release after Battlefield 5, and if you were around for when Battlefield 5 released, you would know that that game was not received fondly. And I would know almost better than anyone because I streamed Battlefield 5 every single day from the very first early access period to the bitter cancellation of Battlefield 5. I experienced every single day of that game. And let me just guarantee you, Battlefield 5 hurt the franchise substantially, especially after Battlefield 1. So you already have a franchise on its quote-unquote last leg, so Battlefield 2042 had to be great. Battlefield 2042 had to be that game to give the franchise a bit of a rebound. So what did EA and Battlefield end up doing to help complete this monumental task? Well, they utilized their phenomenal trailer team to great effect and delivered a nostalgia-baiting banger of a trailer that blew Battlefield 5's announcement trailer out of the water. And unfortunately, as a result of this trailer, a lot of people got excited. And let me just tell you right now, that didn't work out very well. It is truly a shame that it doesn't make any sense to get excited for a Battlefield release because of the infamous nature of how terrible Battlefield's releases have been, stretching as far back as Battlefield 3 and 4. You'd think by now people would have figured out that trailers don't matter, but I suppose not. But after all the pomp and circumstance, all the hype, the discussion, speculation, leaks, teases, the players finally got to get their hands on Battlefield 2042 in the open beta. And what happened next will go down in video game history as one of the most infamous, disappointing, and flat-out pathetic video game first impressions of all time. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember staying up all night and streaming my first impressions at 4 o'clock in the morning to an eager audience of over 1,300 live viewers, most of which probably have never watched me before and are just here to see the new Battlefield game, which everyone has waited a very long time for. And to their absolute shock and horror, they are greeted with a game which is completely unrecognizable as a Battlefield game. Upon loading into my very first match, I noticed that there's no scoreboard in this Battlefield game. There is no class system in this supposed Battlefield game. The UI looks as if it was whipped up in about 15 seconds, and the hit registration is the worst I have ever seen, with entire magazines of my weapon's bullets going through people without registering a single point of damage. Everywhere you look, there was a bug or a glitch or some game-breaking stupidity going on, and it's not like the performance of the game was great either. People were struggling to run Battlefield 2042, even though graphically, it's not as impressive as previous titles. Even something as simple as moving around in the game and aiming felt completely unacceptable, and we only later learned that the actual input of the game at an engine level was bugged. But surely this will be fixed on release. In fact, a couple days after the open beta, the developers issued a statement saying that this version of the beta was a quote-unquote old build of the game. So surely, ladies and gentlemen, upon release, all of these blatantly obvious issues will be, at the bare minimum, drastically improved, right? And I certainly wish I could say things were drastically improved upon the release of the game, but unfortunately, they were not. Battlefield 2042's release lives in absolute infamy. It was one of those releases that will linger inside of you for the rest of your life. It felt as though when this game released, it left an eternal scar upon the entire gaming community forever. And this release transcended FPS games. It bled into other communities. Every single person, even people that don't play video games, knew how terrible this release was. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you know this is one of the top 10 worst released games of the decade, if not ever. But I'm not going to waste time talking about this game's release any longer. As I stated, almost everyone knows how bad it was already, so let's talk about why it was bad. Let's go through each and every single section. And a quick reminder, if you are enjoying this review, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's start off with a big juicy one, the maps. It is impossible to talk about Battlefield 2042's maps without mentioning the fact that Battlefield 2042 was initially supposedly meant to be a battle royale, and Battlefield 2042 was the first Battlefield game to feature 128 player support. The combination of these two things guaranteed that Battlefield 2042's maps would be terrible. It was just a question of how terrible they would be. And let me not sugarcoat this at all. Battlefield 2042's maps are, without any shadow of a doubt, the worst Battlefield maps in the history of the franchise. In fact, Battlefield 2042's map design was so bad that a lot of the content that Battlefield 2042 received had to do with DICE going back and reworking existing base game maps. And when we're talking about Battlefield 2042 maps, it's very important to understand just how bad they truly are in comparison to, well, any other Battlefield game. This isn't normal bad. This set an entire new bar for just how bad some of these map designs can be. For instance, those of you that played the game on launch will remember the fact that they put points on the top of skyscrapers in Breakthrough, which led to literally uncappable objectives. Some maps were so open and desolate, like Hourglass, that you could easily spend a few minutes without seeing another enemy player. But even Kaleidoscope and Hourglass aren't as bad as Manifest. Manifest is a great example of a map that had absolutely no thought put into it whatsoever. It seemingly was constructed in about 10 minutes simply using one map asset, the crate. And this became a meme. Whenever DICE tried to rework a map, they would simply put more crates and more sandbags, and they would copy-paste these things everywhere. And when it came time to quote-unquote rework Manifest, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That same mantra stayed true, except when they reworked Manifest, it played the exact same as it already did. They spent months to accomplish a quote-unquote rework of the map and accomplished exactly nothing. But realistically, you can boil down Battlefield 2042's map designs to two main things in my opinion. Number one, 128 players. The addition of 128 players to Battlefield 2042 caused DICE to bite off way more than they could chew, and they had absolutely no idea how to go about the map designs for any of these modes. This caused DICE to essentially blow up map size to way larger than they actually needed, which sacrificed map flow, area design, and everything under the sun. But not even 128 players can be completely blamed for the failure of Battlefield 2042's map design. This brings us to our second reason, which is sheer laziness and incompetence. Some of the map designs are just head-scratching. Why would you ever put points on the top of a skyscraper? Why would you ever make a map with fields as large as discarded? Why would you ever design a map with as much dead, useless area as Hourglass or Breakaway? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is really simple. They don't know what they're doing. And before I make the map section alone over 40 minutes, I'm just going to end it with this. I think you guys understand why the maps are bad. Many people have played them, and many people can even tell they're bad without playing them, so I think that section is largely self-explanatory. And since we've already mentioned the maps and some of the reworks, we might as well go over the content for Battlefield 2042 and compare it to previous Battlefield games. This should be fun. One of the most hilarious comparisons you can make when discussing Battlefield 2042's abysmal amount of content is pointing out that Battlefield 1's They Shall Not Pass DLC added more maps at one point than Battlefield 2042 ever received in its entire content lifecycle. It took DICE a full year since the release of Battlefield 2042 to add just 3 new maps to the game. Comparing this to Battlefield Hardline, one of the least celebrated Battlefield games of all time, Battlefield Hardline received 18 new maps in the same time period. And as if this wasn't embarrassing enough, Battlefield Hardline also has more vehicles and more weapons. And let's not forget, a lot of the maps and weapons that Battlefield 2042 has available to it are available in Portal, which is not the base game of Battlefield 2042. I think it goes without saying that the amount of content Battlefield 2042 received is utterly laughable and unacceptable, and the bare minimum we should receive as a community for the next title should be double, if not triple, the amount of content per content drop. And I know some people are going to point out that the Battlefields I'm referencing are premium Battlefield games compared to live service. Guess what? I don't care, because they're charging the same amount of money, and they're delaying the next Battlefield game a full year. So guess what? I don't want to hear any excuses anymore. And unfortunately with that, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the section of the review that I dreaded recording the most. This section details some of the most horrific decision-making and some of the poorest quality I have ever seen, not only in Battlefield, but in any game ever. And I will start this section off by mentioning the most unacceptable thing about Battlefield 2042 that has persisted since even before the beta of Battlefield 2042, and that is the fact that the aiming itself, the very input of the game, is bugged at an engine level. If you have ever been playing Battlefield 2042 on PC or console, and you're wondering, why do I not feel locked in? The aim feels really bad. Guess what? It's not entirely you. It actually feels terrible. And it isn't like this is some sort of massive conspiracy theory. This has been acknowledged by the developers of the game for literal years, and nothing has been done about it. So ultimately, what this means is, DICE willingly allowed Battlefield 2042 to persist having broken aiming in the game as a first-person shooter for the entirety of its life cycle. And for me personally, this is literally the most unacceptable thing they could have possibly done. But before I rant about this for over 2 hours straight, allow me to mention some of the other subjects in this section. Some of these that I will mention have a silver lining. The silver lining is they did eventually get fixed, but the fact that they even had to fix them is depressing in its own right. Who remembers when Battlefield 2042 released and there wasn't a scoreboard? And even worse, a Battlefield game released without a functional class system. And arguably even worse, that class system was replaced with specialists that had some of the cringiest voice lines ever recorded in video game history.
Don't be sad. This is just how it works out sometimes.
But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, all of this stuff that I just mentioned is fine because at least they had squad management. Oh wait, they didn't in a Battlefield game. DICE unironically released a Battlefield game without a class system or a squad management system. Allow that to seep into your gray matter for a second and truly try to understand that. But unfortunately, it doesn't even end there for Battlefield 2042, because who remembers Hazard Zone? Oh, nobody? No one remembers Hazard Zone? Okay, let me tell you what it was. Hazard Zone was supposed to be an extraction shooter mode that they put in Battlefield 2042. And guess what? Nobody played it. No one played it. It died instantaneously, and in my opinion, Hazard Zone was not only one of the most useless modes I've ever seen in a Battlefield game, but Hazard Zone was one of the worst attempts at a game mode ever. Like, literally ever. I have made better game modes in Halo Reach's Forge system on my Xbox 360. I shudder to imagine the amount of time that they wasted developing Hazard Zone that could have been used in other portions of the game. And the exact same can be said about the dynamic weather system and particularly the tornado. I understand people like their dynamic weather, but the fact that DICE general manager Oscar Gabrielson said that they spent 3 years trying to build the tornado into Battlefield 2042 only for it to be a massive gameplay gimmick literally disgusts me to my very soul.
I mean, we've worked for a good 3 years now on some of these new weather and evolution systems.
Why didn't they just abandon it and use that time for something that actually mattered? But that's the problem, right? They didn't actually know what mattered. Their priorities were completely and utterly misplaced. And the scary part is, I bet you a lot of these developers that were working on this game knew it, and they could do nothing about it. They just had to work on it. And credit where credit is due. They did add a class system. They did add a scoreboard. They added squad management. They removed the cringe voice lines, even though some of them that they left in the game are still cringe. But the fact of the matter is, they shouldn't have had to do any of that stuff, because it shouldn't have been a problem. But who knows, in DICE and EA's eyes, maybe it was never a problem. That's the scariest thought. Now, before I jump over to the gameplay sections of this review, I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this review. This was a massive undertaking for me, and I really wanted to improve upon the quality of the last review that I did years ago for Battlefield 5. So I hope you guys are enjoying. If you are, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Onward with the review, and this time we're going to discuss gunplay, the recoil bug, and movement. I will start with gunplay. Battlefield 2042's gunplay is a very interesting topic of major contention. Some people love it, other people absolutely hate it. But it's important to understand that Battlefield 2042's gunplay has seen multiple different iterations throughout the life cycle of Battlefield 2042. When 2042 first released, the gunplay was best described with a single word: laser beam. It didn't matter what weapon category you were using, it didn't matter the distance the target was away from you, you could probably kill that person with a full auto spray. This obviously led to massive gameplay implications because now people were dying much faster from full auto gunfire from much farther away than they were typically used to dying from. What this essentially means is the weapon's effective ranges were almost double, if not triple, what they used to be in previous Battlefield games. And as many of you know, Battlefield 2042's recoil isn't exactly high. In fact, Battlefield 2042's gunplay gets criticized a lot for being like Nerf guns or water guns. There's essentially no recoil to be found that actually matters. But after a long while, the RM68 came out. And those of you watching this video that have played Battlefield 2042 will know of the dreaded RM68. We're talking about an assault rifle that could easily 100% accuracy spray you down from over 140 meters. For those of you that maybe haven't played the game, this means you're dying literally almost instantly from targets that are the size of a pea on your screen. Some people would say, this is how guns work, bro, but those people don't understand that this is a video game, and video games require balance. So with the problems of the gunplay pretty firmly established and the community now getting annoyed, DICE actually took a pretty coherent course of action. They simply reduced the effective ranges of these weapons by making spread matter more. Spread was always in Battlefield 2042, it just simply didn't matter in the gunplay. So what they tried to do is, they tried to make you burst in order to regain accuracy, much like you used to be able to do in Battlefield 3 and 4. This of course made a lot of sense, however there are some very fine details here that DICE got wrong. But just because these are fine details, doesn't mean that they're irrelevant. They're actually incredibly important. First of all, Battlefield 2042's spread system works completely differently than Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4's spread system. So when DICE went into Battlefield 2042 to try to tweak the gunplay to make it more like the previous titles, they only got about 75% of the way there because they didn't bother redesigning how the spread system in 2042 actually functioned. What essentially ended up happening is, it just felt like a jankier version of Battlefield 3 and 4 gunplay. So many people are left upset about this. In classic DICE fashion, the execution was the thing that was missing. The idea was actually fine. But there's even more intricacies to Battlefield 2042's gunplay story than meets the eye, because fast forward a couple months, and myself and a friend of mine discovered that Battlefield 2042's recoil system has been bugged, presumably since the beta, which means that every single person playing Battlefield 2042 up until this point has been using bugged recoil, and nobody even knew. But it's okay, because when my friend and I discovered that the recoil system was bugged, we pushed this bug to the developers and it was fixed. Or so we thought, until DICE accidentally re-bugged it in one of the Season 7 updates, and to this day, it is still bugged in Battlefield 2042, even after DICE tried to fix it. So overall, as you can probably imagine, Battlefield 2042's gunplay is really just a complete and total mess. My overall thoughts about the gunplay are that it's not the worst, and it's also not the best. It could be much better, and there are things that are just simply not executed very well. If I personally had to change the gunplay for the better, I would rework the spread system so that you can accurately get the correct burst feel for the game, and it would make the game feel astronomically better, and it would fix a lot of the engagement distance problems. Lastly, I'll mention the movement briefly here. I think Battlefield 2042's movement is just sort of generic. There's not really anything amazing about it. There's not anything terrible about it. They could easily make the movement feel a lot better if they just tightened up the acceleration and deceleration values on strafing. A lot of the times when you move in this game, people mention it feels like you're on ice skates. You don't feel like you can stop on a dime like you need to be able to, and that has to deal with the acceleration and deceleration values. A lot of people criticize Battlefield 2042's movement for being bunny hoppy or Call of Duty-like, but I think people really need to get it through their heads that Battlefield has been Call of Duty on large maps for literally over a decade at this point. Also, movement being fast doesn't really make it Call of Duty, because I think a lot of people have amnesia. You could dolphin dive in your beloved Battlefield 2, but a lot of people don't like to bring that up for some reason. Overall, Battlefield 2042's movement system definitely allowed the game to have some form of skill gap with movement, which is absolutely essential for gameplay, and I cannot emphasize that enough. But with that being said, I do wish it just felt better, and I could say that for the entirety of Battlefield 2042. And before I get ahead of myself too much here and talk about vehicles and then wrap the video up, I want to talk about Portal, which was one of the things that sold people on Battlefield 2042. Portal promised a mix of many different Battlefield games, fully customizable experiences, and basically, it would just let you do whatever. Amazing editors that would let you implement custom game modes and whatever have you. And yes, in theory, Portal was actually pretty cool, but in practice, Unfortunately, DICE made a fatal mistake that ruined Portal forever. See, when everyone heard about Portal, people thought, oh man, we can go back in Battlefield 3 and play No Shark Canal 24/7 Team Deathmatch? That sounds awesome. But guess what? No one made that. You want to know why? DICE's fatal mistake with Portal was allowing too much customizability. What this meant is these cool game modes that you thought you would play were actually replaced with some of the most heinous creations that have ever scorned this planet. And while DICE is to blame for enabling the Battlefield community to go ahead and make 1000% Afghanistan milsim servers, the Battlefield community itself is also to blame for making these horrific creations. If you would like, pause the video and then open Battlefield 2042 Portal for yourself, and I'd be willing to bet all you see are weird milsim servers with exorbitant levels of damage and a plethora of XP grinding servers. Portal should have been much stricter on what you're allowed to create, just for the sake of making sure that what you create is actually playable. Completely horrendous 1000% damage one-shot kill servers would be replaced with something, I don't know, more tame, such as 24/7 best maps, or perhaps No Shark Canal TDM, or redacted 3000 tickets, whatever have you. In other words, instead of Portal being a complete laughingstock, Portal would actually be played. And speaking of laughingstock, now we can go ahead and talk about Battlefield 2042's vehicle gameplay and balance. And the best way to demonstrate this to all of you lovely people watching this video is by going through the separate eras of overpowered Battlefield 2042 vehicle gameplay. In the beginning, when Battlefield 2042 just released, there was the dreaded skyscraper scaling suction cup hovercraft. You heard me correct, ladies and gentlemen. A simple transport vehicle terrorized the battlefield, causing mass devastation and mayhem for literal weeks. This transport vehicle was heavily armored, maneuverable, and had extremely effective weapons. And you thought you were safe on top of a building? Guess what? When Battlefield 2042 came out, the hovercraft could scale skyscrapers by suction cupping itself onto the sides of buildings. And the funniest part is, the hovercraft wasn't even the only deranged, overpowered vehicle that was available at this time. There were multiple other vehicles that were just as broken, if not even more broken. Allow me to remind you of one of my favorite and fondest eras of Battlefield 2042, the jet ram. See, when jets released in Battlefield 2042, they were really bad. So you know what people did? They figured out that jets were able to spawn in and fly around before the enemy team's infantry players were loaded into the server. But there's a catch. The enemy team's infantry players were still able to be killed. So what did people do? They slammed these jets into the entire enemy team, killing sometimes upwards of 20 people before the game even started. And you know what the worst part about this is? They made the exact same mistake in Battlefield 5. In Battlefield 5, this is jumping way back, you could bomb the entire enemy team with the Jubba before they even moved. So they made the same mistake in two different games, back to back. And meanwhile, while the jets were ramming into entire teams and hovercrafts were terrorizing people all over the map, the Super Hind, the attack helicopter, and the 30mm Bolt were all overpowered at the exact same time. The attack helicopter was essentially a free 50 kill streak whenever you spawned in, the Bolt was even freer and arguably harder to kill, and the Super Hind, with its explosive 50mm cannon, dual miniguns, and dual repair seats, remains to this day the most overpowered vehicle ever seen in a Battlefield game. In fact, the Super Hind was so overpowered, I set out to get this vehicle nerfed, and I went on multiple 100, even 200 plus kill streaks in this vehicle. But even the developers of Battlefield 2042 admitted defeat when it came to the Super Hind, because as we all remember, the Super Hind wasn't even supposed to be an attack helicopter. It was supposed to be a transport helicopter. So what did the developers do? Yes, they nerfed the Super Hind, but they also changed the transport helicopter vehicle category and renamed it to Gunship. So I'm sure by now you guys understand the point. Battlefield 2042's vehicle gameplay and balance is arguably the worst ever. What Battlefield 2042's vehicles needed is mechanics in order to make them more difficult to utilize. Anyone can pick up the Super Hind and be a good pilot. That wasn't the case in Battlefield 3 or 4. In fact, those of you that flew a lot in Battlefield 3 and 4 know that it took hundreds, if not thousands of hours to perfectly master the vehicle's mechanics. In fact, Battlefield 3 and 4's vehicles were so in-depth that entire separate communities formed around specifically playing in these vehicles. There were heli 1v1s, jet dogfights, you name it, it existed. That's because Battlefield 3 and 4's vehicles had mechanics that attracted people. People wanted to learn the vehicles, it formed a community, and overall they were just way better designed. Jets needed speed control. Helicopters needed gravity and different weight mechanics, and just generally something to learn. So, after all of this discussion, all of this yapping I've been doing, what is next for Battlefield? What should the developers do for the next game? In order to gauge what people want for the next Battlefield game, I asked Reddit, my YouTube channel, Twitter, Discord, Twitch, and to no shock of mine, there is absolutely no general consensus. But that's fine because I truly believe the next Battlefield game is super easy for DICE to make. In fact, I'm just gonna go out and say it. The next Battlefield game is the easiest DICE and EA and whatever other studios are working on Battlefield have ever had it. What they need to do is clear cut and dry. Number one, you have easy settings to choose from. You can do a spin-off of the Cold War, where the Cold War actually starts. That would keep the setting modern. That would be a setting that we haven't experienced in Battlefield before. You could do a spin-off of the Gulf War. You could keep it modern and make up a fake war, like you did in Battlefield 4. But what do all these things point to? It points to modern. You have to keep the next Battlefield game within the realm of modern combat. Other than that, it's very straightforward. Don't add specialists into the next game. Get rid of 128 players. Get your priorities straight. Basically, make Battlefield 4.5, and I think people will be happy. But remember this, DICE, they'll only be happy if you actually execute and produce a quality video game. It doesn't matter how much time you have. If you do not provide an amazing Battlefield game this time around, this very well could be Battlefield's last chance. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this review. Battlefield 2042, for me personally, has been an absolute struggle. I love this franchise. I started streaming and I formed a career streaming Battlefield in really the most unfortunate time. I missed the glory days, but my persistence and my love for this franchise has given me you guys, an amazing community that has shown unwavering support through the darkest ages of this game. And I just would love to see, just one time, DICE deliver a game that makes the community happy so we can all share it together. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys for everything you do. You have truly changed my life for the better, and I hope that the next Battlefield game can be covered in a more positive light. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.